This episode of Manage Smarter is presented by Sales Fuel Coach, our adaptive sales coaching featuring 5-minute quick coaching personalized to each sales rep. Learn more about Sales Fuel Coach at salesfuel.com. Welcome to the Manage Smarter podcast with hosts C. Lee Smith and Audrey Strong. We're glad you're here for discussions on new ways to manage smarter, hire, develop and retain talent, improve results, and propel team performance to new heights. This is the Manage Smarter podcast.
We know Rishad Tobaccowala, our guest today, he says people have two wildly different reactions to a digital disruption. Digital disruption of any kind in the workplace. And he's going to explain what that is. But I think you have an idea of what those two things might be, right?
Well, and also in today's climate, especially with the recent reaction then to coronavirus and like that, we've got a lot more data. We've got a lot more remote working going on. You want to talk about disruptive change? Boy, that's a big one right there. And so we're going to try to touch all the bases on with that and other topics today.
Absolutely. Welcome to Manage Smarter, everyone. I'm Audrey Strong, Vice President of Communications here at Sales Fuel.
And I'm C. Lee Smith, the President and CEO of Sales Fuel.
And as I said, Rishad Tobaccowala, he is our guest today, author of Restoring the Soul of Business. It's a great book. You can get it on Amazon. Staying Human in the Age of Data. Also senior advisor to the Publicis Groupe. He spent his entire 37-year career, most recently serving as the Chief Growth Officer and Chief Strategist of that group. Get this, named by BusinessWeek as one of the top business leaders for his pioneering innovation, and Time Magazine called him one of 5 marketing innovators. And so, Rishad, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so digital disruption. I know you said people have one reaction to it or the other. I know what category I'm in, but let's start with that. What are the two sort of groups that people divide into when faced with this type of thing?
Either they embrace it or they run from it. So one group basically says, I want to retire before this happens. And the other one basically says, this is my magic carpet to the future.
Right. So in terms of that, what are some of the ways the managers can get people to not run away, but be lifelong learners and embrace, ride the wave of what's happening? What are some of the tips?
So there are, 3 or 4 big tips. The first one is to recognize that for most people, including people who want to be forward thinking, is that very simply change sucks. So, my belief is that when people come and tell me to change, I say, I'm a happy person. Please change yourself. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But I'm happy. So don't you bother. The other one is to recognize that if you want people to also change, you have to incentivize them to change, which is just telling them change is good isn't enough. You have to either find ways to pay them more or reward them when they change. That's one set. The second one, and then obviously you got to communicate, educate, and constantly recognize that people, we are not digital, silicon, data-driven things. We're analog, carbon-based feeling things. And so it takes us some time to respond. We don't switch on and switch off. The second one, which is extremely important, is to also help people upgrade their mental operating systems. Because one of the key things when we are thinking about change is we have to learn new things and we have to build new skill sets. And we spend a lot of time all over the world, including in America, thinking about what we eat and how we move our bodies, which is kind of interesting because if you don't have a good physical operating system, you're dead and everything else is off the table. But what separates us from monkeys is the invention of fire that allowed us to build our minds versus our stomachs. We don't spend enough time thinking about how to learn and what goes into our minds. And so I have this entire chapter called How to Upgrade Your Mental Operating System. Because one is, okay, you want to change, but then in what direction do you actually go? And those are the two big factors, which is let's get going, and it's not easy, but then which direction do you go?
I noticed that managers, when trying to spark change, make change happen, they tend to either they tend to use data too much, or they tend to not use data at all, or not use data enough. Which one of those two things is more dangerous and is more likely to lead to a bad outcome?
So my basic belief is they leads to a bad outcome when they lean too much towards data only, which is what they tend to do these days. So the underlying thesis of my book, or rather there's something that connects all the chapters, because you can read any chapter in any order, but the connecting tissue is what I call successful leaders and companies balance the story and the spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet is the math and the data of a business, the P&L, et cetera, which is extremely important. And to my basic belief is growing actually so important and so overemphasized that it may eventually lead companies into thinking only about the numbers. So opening new accounts was the key driving force behind Wells Fargo. So why not open fake accounts, right? Shipping a plane, we got to ship the plane, we got to ship the plane, even though there were internal concerns. Why not override those internal concerns? And you've got Boeing 737 MAX. So if you just go with the spreadsheet, you're going to get yourself into a problem. Also because human beings human beings choose with their hearts and they use numbers to justify what they just do. So we can use our numbers. On the other hand, so therefore the story is important. The story is basically understanding people's needs, being empathetic to them, understanding culture, understanding purpose and values of companies, etc. But if you're just about story, then you have another problem, and that's you build companies like WeWork, right? So if you think about WeWork, it's this amazing story that had nothing to do with reality, and then you get yourself crushed. So I truly believe it's story and spreadsheet, but everyone can see the numbers. But how do you bring insight, inspiration, and then eventually action to those numbers is what we look for in leaders.
I think sometimes the managers will take a look at that and just say, that numbers are easier to deal with. They don't talk back, they don't change their minds. Dealing with people is messy.
It is. And I have a line which says everything is easy, but people get in the way.
Yeah. So if you're fusing together emotion and the data, like you said, look at both parts. One of the other things that you talk about this transforming organizations that happens is an increase in empathy and creativity among staff. And what is the importance of those two things, and how do you draw that out?
So there are two factors. One is a lot of companies, as they change, they do these things called the offsite. If you remember, they go to a place, sure. Give people crayons and color, and they no ideas are wrong. Which basically tells me that why can't you have crayons and why don't you give crayons to everybody all the time? They're pretty cheap, and you can just tell people no ideas are bad all the time, right? So I've actually thought about it slightly different, which is in many ways, the best entrepreneurs and the best offsites are actually interacting with artists. Because when you think about art, whether it's a writer, a speaker, a singer, a painter, they all start with a blank sheet of paper, and they invent something, and they reframe the way we look at the world, and they take risks, right? So one of the key things I tell people is let's put some poetry into the PowerPoint, and let's discuss, expose, and talk about, and let people go and have artistic experiences that they come back and talk about. One of the most amazing things is some people have taken this so seriously that many companies have bought copies of my books for all their employees, and they're having book clubs around the book as a form of art.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Okay, which is that they're selecting certain chapters and they say, let's discuss how this affects our business, which is sort of one. But the other reason why I bring in this whole idea of empathy and other personal stuff is for a long time I've studied leadership, and a big thing that I discovered is that good leaders have 5 characteristics. One of them, not surprising, is capability. You can't be a good leader unless you're a capable person. The second one, very important, but also probably well known, is integrity, which is people have to trust you. But it's the other 3 factors, which are very emotional, that I found were the driving factors. One of them, obviously you have to be capable and you have to have trust. But the really big leaders can inspire people, which is they can make them think beyond the numbers, right? So today, to a great extent, we are desperately, I basically sort of did a little karaoke version of Mrs. Robinson, and said, where are you, Mr. Obama? Our nation turns its anxious eyes to you, right? Because in effect, this is the time when you need inspirational leadership, which as a country, which we are sort of lacking. So one is we need inspiration. The other thing you need is empathy. The ability to recognize that however badly all of us may be suffering from this, there are other people who are suffering worse. And finally, vulnerability, which is the ability to say, hey, shit, this is tough times. We got to do something about it, right? I myself am confused and I need to know. And so, in effect, because of good leadership having these emotional elements and artists having these emotional elements, I basically talk about that.
When you talk about the spreadsheet and a story, it makes me think that about management and leadership being both an art and a science.
It is. It is. And life is an art and science,
Mm-hmm.
which is the key thing, which is if we, I've always basically believed that when someone comes to me and says, I live in this world where everything is possible, I say, yes, everything is possible till you basically have a crisis and then you've got no science and math to help you.
Until you get punched in the face.
Like Mike Tyson says.
Yes,
right?
that's right.
On the other hand, if you run it all by the numbers and that's all you do, you have two problems. Problem number one is your job will be replaced by a computer before you can say jack sprat, because machines can do all of that thing much faster. The other is just looking at the numbers is basically looking at the entire world through the cells of a spreadsheet, which means you are jailed for life.
And that spreadsheet was programmed by whom? That's the other thing.
Right. And the other thing is it's basically been programmed by a bunch of people of internal biases, one of which basically is to make you work like a rat and be completely engaged, to be surrounded by stuff that basically makes you feel good.
Yeah. Wow.
A bunch of white guys in Silicon Valley.
Yes, who basically care a lot about home delivery service.
Yeah, and, an algorithm with certain metrics and benchmarks that you're supposed to hit, right? So
yes, and unfortunately that has become so prevalent. Is what now we all sort of react to this. Like there are all these things about literally how many reviews, how many stars, how many this. So all of us are basically like running around trying to collect these fake metrics in some ways, which have been optimized to make other people money, but make us feel like we have social capital. Mm-hmm. The problem is social capital has never paid a bill, excepting if you got so much social capital that you become Kim Kardashian or someone like that.
Are there times or good times when leaders should not use data in making their decisions?
Yes, I truly believe that the best leaders make their best decisions by first sitting with a lot of data, then sitting with a lot of people, and then it's not a gut judgment, it's an informed judgment. And usually the informed judgment that works tends to resonate on a human scale. Jeff Bezos basically says whenever he sees the data, he looks at it, but then when he hears a story and an anecdote, he then asks his people to go find the data to see if that anecdote is true or not. Mm-hmm. Right? So in many ways, the input should basically come from human, but then you should basically utilize data to interrogate whether that's just, how deep is it, how wide is it, and how true it is. So it's one of those key things. But just by looking at an array of numbers doesn't tell you much. It's like basically being a technical stock trader.
Plus, I can make those numbers. I could spend those numbers any way I want.
That's the key. What tends to happen is one of the key things we do have is the new language, because it doesn't speak back, is math. And what tends to happen is you can make numbers look amazing, with using statistical packages and other things. And so as I quote in my book, I think it's Mark Twain, there are lies and then there are statistics.
Damn lies and statistics, that's right.
And so you can, and we tend to, often I basically ask people, before you show me anything, please tell me what your incentive for this meeting is, or can you tell me what your incentive system is, right? And then I said, you don't have to show me anything, you're going to show me the following things that basically incent that align with your incentive system. And you really don't care about me, you just have aligned with your incentive system. But you'll make it look like it's all about me, but it's really about your incentive system.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. And when I was kind of doing show prep, Rishad, and looking over the book and everything, I got to ask about when you say it's essential to have a culture and courage that calls out, quote, the turd on the table. I had to ask, There's a chapter called The Turd on the Table. Why don't you explain the concept of that? So we can all embrace it.
I guess, yes.
Embrace the turd on the table.
I think you have to embrace the concept of the turd on the table, but
Okay.
not embrace the turd itself.
Oh.
Okay.
Was this caused by the elephant in the room? That's what I want to know.
It was sort of that. It was actually used in a real meeting, which is actually quoted in the book, and that's the other thing people find fascinating in the book. You know, I say you can read any chapter in any order. Many of them basically start with the turd on the table, right? And the basic idea is all of us know in business, we sit around in rooms, and there's something in the middle of the table which is brown and moist, and we think it's a brownie, but we all know it's a piece of shit, right? But we don't call it out. And so we then pretend. And the same company that basically says, we want, risk-taking and we want innovation, punishes people who basically say, hey, why are we doing this? Or, hey, boss, you don't know what you're doing. Or, things like that. So I truly believe that at the aforementioned Wells Fargo and Boeing, people were calling out the turd, but people were not listening to them or punishing them, right? So how do you create an environment where if you're younger, you can actually speak up without losing your job, which is what I used to do when I still had my job, or when you're older not older, but more senior in your career, like I became, how do I make sure that people can come up to me and either say the strategy I'm working on makes no sense, the direction of the company makes no sense, and often I make no sense.
It's interesting.
And without that, how the hell do you improve? So,
or sometimes what happens, Rishad, is like, hey, I think it'd be a great idea if instead of doing this, we started doing this.
Yes.
And then what happens is like, that sounds like a great idea. Why don't you lead the team where to make that happen? And now all of a sudden you're being rewarded, so to speak, putting air quotes, then, with more work to do when you don't have time to do the work you're doing now.
Yeah. And people basically don't do it, one, because they've learned to keep their heads down, because it'll get chopped off, or two, it'll be someone will put more on their head, as you say, more to do, right? Or third, and we have to be aware of this, which is maybe we're wrong, right? So when you see something that doesn't make sense, it doesn't mean it's wrong. It may mean you aren't seeing it from the right angle. You don't have all the information, and you might be wrong. And someone will say it when people come to me and I tell that, I have to tell them that they haven't seen the whole picture or they're wrong. I don't say it that way. What I basically say is, first, thank you very much for coming here. Second, it's very clear that I've not communicated all the facts, because if you had all the facts, you may come up with this different way of looking at it. My fault. I didn't give you all the facts. And therefore, you telling me this, even though I'm not going to give you the facts, you're going to see it probably my way, you've improved me by basically saying me I haven't told you all the facts. But more importantly, I am so glad you spoke up, and please keep speaking up. Once you do that, people will always speak up.
So with all the social distancing and everything like that's been going on, started with the coronavirus and our needed reaction to it, I'm wondering, do we risk some long-term loss to our human connection, with our coworkers, as people have to stay apart from each other, or we're working more remotely? And I don't believe that after, once the crisis is over, that all of a sudden we're going to all flock back to the office. I think we're just going to prove that, hey, we can get as much done, if not more done, from home. And people are going to look at the numbers and the productivity there and go and continue to allow that to happen. But by doing that, though, do we risk losing something bigger?
We do. So what I have is a chapter in my book called Managing the Darker Side of Brighter Screens. And as you would expect with someone like me with the story and the spreadsheet, I basically consider a middle path. So I actually compare two things. I compare the way I used to work 38 years ago and how I do it today, right? And 38 years ago, I would write something on a piece of paper. My assistant would put it on a typewriter. We'd use whiteout to make sure it was fine. We'd then go down and we would probably make acetates, right? If I needed some information, I'd basically, go down to the librarian. We had a librarian, and she'd look up microfiches, or she'd get a book and go read the book, and that was that. And today it's a little bit different. And so I believe that modern technology has enabled much greater productivity, much greater what I call diversity, because more people can work from home and look after their kids or look after their older ones or just be in a different city where you can't be. So I truly believe that many of these technologies have truly improved life. On the other hand, if you don't have some personal interactions once in a while, if you don't basically have where people even look at each other and talk about real things versus looking at spreadsheets and numbers, you lose a lot, because what you lose is the human nuance and trust, etc. So there's a company called Automatic. They own WordPress, and now they also own Tumblr. And that company has, I think it's got 1,500 employees, all of whom work remotely. But what's very interesting is some of the things that they do. So, and that's what I call for in my book, which is when I was running groups, I would do this, which is they do 2 or 3 key things. The first is anytime when someone has something that you would physically reward them with, let's say it's my birthday, right? What would tend to basically happen is the company ships a birthday cake to your home. Mm-hmm. Is everybody, if there are 3 people in a room somewhere in a meeting and one person is dialing in from a computer, all the other 3 people also have to dial in on the computer. So everybody's absolutely equal. The third is every single individual is given a budget of $250. I'm not sure whether it's monthly or for the year, to basically do things that enable them to be more connected in their own communities, including, do you want to get a WeWork subscription or whatever else? So yes, you're working for Automatic and you're connected with your employees through the computer, but you're around other physical people. But the most amazing thing is this: 2 to 4 times a year, you have to meet up with your team. So the teams basically decide where they want to meet up. They decide how to fund it. I mean, not the company funds it, but they may say, let's all go to New Orleans for 4 days. We'll have meetings and we all gather together. My team will meet up. And they do that 2 to 4 times a year. And they believe that is absolutely essential for human connection so that the rest of the time they can work this way.
Those are all great ideas, Rishad. And, I know that you two met when Lee saw you speak. If you want Rishad to come speak to your group, @Rishad is your Twitter handle.
Right.
RishadTobaccowala.com is the website. And everybody, you got to go out and get this book, Restoring the Soul of Business, Staying Human in the Age of Data. It's only going to get more datafied.
It's going to get only more datafied, and it's got so datafied that I've had to basically make sure that I use data on Amazon. So you don't even have to remember the book. All you have to remember is RISHAD. And you put RISHAD and out it shows on Amazon.
There you go. Now, you're like Madonna. You're so famous now. You just need the one name.
You're like Brazilian, like a Brazilian football player, yeah?
That's what it is. As I tell people, it's @Rishad, and my email address, believe it or not, is rishad@gmail.com. So it's all Rishad everywhere.
That's fantastic.
That's great. And that's in the show notes, everybody. Rishad, thanks for joining us today. All great stuff, and just a little bit of insight into the book. So we appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more great information at salesfuel.com.